When you think of some of the greatest cities in North America, the first few places that come to mind are probably New York, San Francisco, Boston, Chicago, and a handful of other places. If you happen to call one of these cities home, or have had the privilege to visit one of these places, you're probably thinking that the future of cities in general is on the right track. If you're thinking this, I'm sorry to say that not only do these major cities have major problems, but they only make up the smallest percentage of where most Americans spend all their lives. In reality, it's the small to mid-sized suburban cities in which most people go to work, raise a family, and spend their livelihood. These cities look more like this. We know that Monterey, Tacoma, and Cincinnati, just to name a few, simply can't live up to the quality of life that the major cities mentioned prior can. Another fact we know is that if not for school, jobs, or other commitments, most people would flee to these major cities in a heartbeat. As we grow up, we realize that our boring hometowns with poor street design and lack of social activity simply aren't enough to make us stay. When I thought about this, the first question that came to my mind was why? Why were some cities built for greatness and the rest were made for people to merely get by? And the first answer that came to my mind is that that's just the way it's always been. That's the way the world works, and that's probably what most of you are thinking right now because that's all we've ever known. Someone decided one day that New York would be the city that never sleeps, and someone else decided that Brandon, Iowa would be the home of the world's largest frying pan. To some of you, this question may seem impossible to answer. To others, you may not have even questioned the imperfections of your city until this moment. And the rest of you don't believe that the way a city is designed has any effect on our current lives, which is hopefully something I can convince you of otherwise in this talk. The reason that cities are the way they are can be boiled down to one thing: walkability. But before I get into it, I must make it clear that this talk is not going to be an intellectual revelation meant to change the world, because nothing I'm going to discuss is anything new, and we simply don't need one of those. For thousands and thousands of years, civilizations around the world have optimized cities for our social, cultural, and financial needs, and people throughout history have built cities around walking. Today, places all over the world were able to implement these ideas into their own cities, but for some reason, in North America, city officials make our lives worse rather than better. And this isn't because of a defiance to these ideas, but because of a disconnection and an ignorance between the people designing our cities and what we actually need. As most of you know, I'm not an urban planner, and I have no degree in architecture, and I definitely have no qualifications to be designing a city. But what I am is someone who, just like you, wants to live in a place where I can walk to the grocery store or the park and feel completely 100% safe. Someone who wants to be able to explore their city instead of driving past it every day at 70 miles per hour. And I'm someone who, just like you, wants to live in a place where finding and building community doesn't have to be so difficult. In this talk, I'm going to go over the future of our beloved cities, a brief history on urbanism, simple solutions that would fix the problems of American suburbia, and things we can do in our everyday lives to combat these issues. In the book, Walkable City, I learned that there are 4 things that go into building the best city possible. You have to think about whether a city is safe, useful, comfortable, and interesting. The things that make North America what it is today are complex and multifaceted. However, I believe the one thing that is the destroyer of all cities and completely breaks all 4 of these principles is cars. The suburbs today may be hard to imagine without cars, but if you think about it, the suburbs were only invented about 80 years ago. The 1950s marked the beginning of the American suburban experiment, and influenced by the baby boom and post-World War II, people wanted more space, a quieter environment, and a seemingly safer community. But what was meant to be an experiment turned into our new normal, and once we realized the flaws of American suburbia, it was too late, and we've never stopped producing for it since. Cars and car dependency make safety and comfortability an impossible task. For one, car dependency is responsible for the lack of independent mobility in America, which is basically the ability for kids to move around freely and go around their neighborhood without adult supervision. And it is also responsible for the oddly young driving age requirement in America being around 16 and in some states 14, and everywhere else in the world following an 18-year-old age requirement. And despite this, vehicle collisions are the #1 cause of death among kids and teenagers in the US today. If governments put more time, money, and effort into safer bike lanes and safer modes of transportation, then we wouldn't have to make the driving age requirement so young just for kids to have some sense of independence. Another thing to mention is that roads simply weren't made for anything other than cars. If you want to take anything that's not a car nowadays, you're forced to cross stroads. Stroads are ugly mixes of streets and roads made for the flow of vehicles and not for the safety of people, which is why today, in the 1950s, more than 50% of people would walk to school, and today, less than 13% do. If we make our roads safer for kids, it not only benefits them, but it benefits everyone involved. If you're still stuck on the whole cars idea, let's face the facts. In this picture above, we have a school bus in Miami completely blocking off a road just for kids to board the bus safely. This not only causes a lack of sympathy for everyone involved, but a lot of traffic. And this photo at the bottom is from the rural Netherlands and shows kids biking to school despite it being miles and miles away. This is because their roads were optimized for the safety of everyone. Someone who actually cared about these problems, believe it or not, was Walt Disney. In fact, in 1966, Disney created the experimental prototype concept of tomorrow, which you may or may not know was Epcot. In Disney's original design, he intended Epcot to revolutionize the future of city design, and Disney's world was literally meant to be Disney's ideal world. He was heavily inspired by his own Disneyland and how the park prioritizes pedestrians over anything else. And while it is an amusement park, I would argue that it is one of the best built North American cities today. And unfortunately, everything that makes it such a great city can only be found merely replicated in high touristy areas. Another example of this would be the Venetian Mall in Las Vegas. In Disney's original design, he wanted to have a central commercial district surrounded by high-rises and residential areas, and people would travel to the center by monorail, and cars and trucks would move underground. Unfortunately, Disney died before he could see his project come into fruition, and his company turned his idea into another theme park and what we know of Epcot today. Moving away from this idea, I want to talk about the fourth area of optimal city design, which is interest. And a good example of this would be our own Alvarado Street. Alvarado Street, unlike most modern suburbs today, has its own locally owned restaurants, cafes, boutiques, and businesses scattered all throughout the avenue. Even though there is a Jamba Juice and Starbucks right around the corner, these small businesses are able to keep up with them because of the variety of things to do. When a neighborhood, town, or city allows itself to develop its own unique blend of shops and businesses, it creates its own unique character and identity. A great example of this is Chinatown, in which people share culture through Chinese food, cuisine, and services, and has basically made a name for itself all over the world. Oh, Chinatown is an example of a place that uses mixed-use development, and it's a place where business owners live in the same spaces as their business. Places like these are seen all over the world in Europe and Asia, and are rarely seen in North America. Although this concept may not seem optimal to those who don't enjoy noise or city life, one has to realize that most of the noise that comes from a city actually comes from traffic. Just imagine if we were able to live in our own Alvarado Street and places like it were spread all throughout California. Not only would this widen our grocery store options to more than just Target, but we would be able to eat, see, learn, and do so much more without having to drive 15 to 20 minutes. In complete opposition to this idea, we have shopping malls. And in fact, the man who invented shopping malls, Victor Gruen, hates his invention. Similar to Walt Disney's story, Gruen's original concept of shopping malls was meant to replicate the shop-lined streets of Vienna, his home country, and was meant to be a place to find and build community. And similar to the lively streets of Europe, he wanted stores and outlets as more of a secondary focus and an attraction more than anything else. However, the people he was working with to bring his idea to life completely scrapped the community building aspects of his idea and created shopping malls into what we know of them today, hubs of consumerism. Shopping malls are a complete waste of space, not only because they require large expansions of land to build large parking lots and big buildings, but also because about a quarter of them are set to close down this year because of one fatal flaw in the system. Unlike mixed-use streets, shopping malls rely on big commercial stores to drive businesses and bring in people. However, when one of these stores closes down or relocates, it not only takes down that store, but everything else within it. And this in turn creates large unused spaces that turn into liminal spaces and completely wasteland that could have been used on safer roads or expanding better cities. And finally, to sort of end this talk, I want to talk about the second area of optimal city design, which is traffic. As something that we find ourselves saying more often than not is, I'm running late because I'm stuck in traffic. As much as you don't want to believe it, you are part of the traffic. And no matter how much space you leave in front of you or how slow you drive, you are part of the problem. As central that traffic is in our lives and how much it affects our lives, you would think that city officials love it. But surprisingly, they don't like it either. So, what's the solution to this? Build more roads. In hindsight, this makes perfect sense. If you have a ton of people, you build more roads for them to accommodate for them, and therefore you have no traffic. However, what happens is this. People put their money, time, and effort into the mode of transportation that works best for them. If you bike to school or work, you buy a bike. If you take the bus, you buy a monthly bus pass. When people see a new road, the people who used to bike, walk, or take the bus buy a car because it's more convenient. The people who would leave their homes earlier to beat the traffic push that time back because it's more convenient. And the people who took a certain route to get places switch to the highway with the extra road. This in turn creates traffic that never even existed before, and is a phenomenon called induced demand or induced traffic. This is when an increase in supply causes a decrease in prices, or in this case, an increase in roads causes more traffic. People bulldoze entire houses, neighborhoods, and even cities to create more roads, and you would think that people would see the 4-lane, 8-lane, even up to 26-lane highways filled with traffic and eventually see the problem, but clearly not. To end this talk, I'm going to leave you with my perfect idea of the perfect city. Of course, I would have streets lined with different shops, restaurants, attractions, and greenery filling every corner. On top of these, I would include housing and residential areas. And on the streets, I would include maybe 1 to 2-way roads with bike lanes sort of built in the roads instead of just thrown on the outskirts. And lastly, I would include many crosswalks and transit or metro lanes that lead to the outside of the city into single-family homes. What seemed impossible is something that we have to realize is the effect of a flawed and unorganized system fueled by traditional zoning laws and ignorant city officials. And it's something that we have to realize we can change today for the better. Thank you.